Hi everyone, my name is Jason. I'm an alcoholic. That treatment thing was a little joke because I was put on the spot to ask what my favorite thing about recovery is, and it's everything really. So my sobriety date is May 5th of 2016. I got a home group in the area where I live. I got a sponsor in AA. I sponsor other guys. I'm also available to sponsor other guys. And if I forget to say it, which sometimes happens, um, I just want to give credit where credit's due. Like I have this really, really amazing life today, and that is because of Alcoholics Anonymous, specifically the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and the relationship with God that I have today, as a result of those steps. So, I was sitting here for a little bit before I got on, trying to come up with like a cool, fun topic. And in that meditation, I came up with nothing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it used to be like, or what I used to be like, rather, what happened and what it's like now. So also, I just want to say there was a lot of new people in the chat, and welcome. It's really, really cool to see you all here, and it's really, really cool that you guys can have this meeting online on a regular basis and have like over 100 people in it. That's awesome. So yeah, I'm not going to get too much into the war stories and stuff. Like that joke about treatment was because I'm somebody who has been to treatment like more than 10 times, most of those times against my will. And when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous this time, I learned that that has nothing to do with me being an alcoholic or not. Those are just like the consequences of my drinking, and other substances which were involved in my story as well. Um, but the beginning of my drinking, right, is this phase where I like to call. It was really, really fun. Like it was awesome. I didn't start drinking and immediately become like a miserable alcoholic. Like I had a lot of fun times. Like that alcohol did something for me, which the big book describes in great detail, but I didn't have the language to describe it at the time. But the best way that I can tell you like what the alcohol did for me is like it took away that uncomfortable feeling, right? Like that spiritual malady that we talk about in the book. And it did something for me. And it just like allowed me to just like breathe, right? Um, and it was really, really fun. And I remember like maybe not the first time I drank, but one of the first times I drank, like I told somebody who was close to me that like I'm gonna do this as much as possible, right? And um like as a 12, 13-year-old kid who looked like maybe he was 8, it wasn't that easy to get alcohol, right? But I spent a lot of time like thinking and planning and like looking forward to the next time that I drank. And I did that for a number of years without really any consequences, and I did it as much as possible. And then it flipped to like another stage where it went from being really, really fun all the time to me having lots of consequences all the time. And a lot of those treatment centers that I went to are a result of that. And all the stuff that kind of comes along with that. And when I got to like my mid 20s, I decided that I didn't want to live this life anymore, right? So I found myself in a treatment center, and I told my counselor at the time, like, hey, like my life's not going really well. Like I have all this stuff going on, like burning it to the ground. Like I see other people around me who do the same things as me, kind of turning around and like growing up and living their life and kind of leaving like the heavy drinking and like all that stuff behind them. And I told him like I want to do that. And he said, well, have you tried a 12-step program? And having been around AA before, not in AA, but I was around AA like a lot. At some point in that time, I didn't have a bad experience with AA. I just came to this conclusion in my head, like this won't work for me. And it's funny because there was no reason behind it. It wasn't like I actually tried to do any of the work and failed, or like just had a bad experience. I was just like, it's not gonna work for me, right? So I asked him like, what else do you got? And he's like, that's all we have here, right? And spoiler, if you've never been to a facility before, like that's what they're going to tell you when you leave, like find a 12-step program. So I didn't want to do that. So I spent the next 5 years trying to figure out any way to either control my drinking or stop my drinking altogether. And that looked like a lot of different things. And it looked like, me going back to school because I figured like if I had responsibilities, like I would be, I would kind of leave that stuff behind. It looked like me trying to get a relationship with someone who's not an alcoholic. It looked like me trying a bunch of different medications, going to different therapists and telling them a bunch of lies and expecting them to fix me. And anything that I could think of to get this thing under control. And at times it looked like I was doing good on the outside because I was trying to fix this with things on the outside. Like everything I just mentioned is like all external stuff. I was using all this external stuff to try to fix an internal problem. And I did that because that was the only thing I knew at the time. That was the best that I could do. And that went on for about 5 years until it blew up, right? And the funny thing was like out of all like the treatment centers I've been to, and I went to like a lot of meetings, admittedly like never got a sponsor. Never opened the big book, never worked a step. And I had this idea in my head, like I just said, like if I just get my life to like a good enough place, like then I'll be okay. And I kind of find out that that's not true. And I thought like being an alcoholic was you had to have like this many consequences, or you had to be homeless, or things like that, which are commonly heard in AA, and that is a misconception if you're new. And when I came to AA this time, I found out about the disease of alcoholism, right? And I'm going to tell like two quick stories of how like looking back on my past experience, like I could identify my drinking to how it's described in the big book, right? So the first one is the big book talks about that physical allergy. And if you're new and you haven't heard that before, it basically means that alcoholics like myself have an abnormal reaction when I put alcohol in my body, right? And that reaction is like I develop a craving for more. And when I put that first one in, like there's no telling what's going to happen. And there was a time, like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years before I got sober, where my mom was really sick, right? She had terminal cancer and she was sick for about 4 years. And that woman, and I don't know if you guys have any family members like this, I'm sure a lot of you do, was the one that would like always have my back despite like all the bullshit that I would do as a result of my drinking, right? To the point where like, I would split up my house and like my parents almost got divorced and my dad would be like, kick me out. And my mom would be like, I can't, like, that's my son, and all that stuff, right? So this was like the woman who probably loved me more than anyone in the world. And she was dying of cancer. And I was out drinking with like a bunch of people who, were my friends at the time. And honestly, telling this story, I can't even remember who I was with. What I do remember is like my father calls me up and I'm out at the bar drinking and he's like, I think your mom is dying. She doesn't have that much time left and she's asking for you. Can you please just come home? And I remember in my head, like my brain like wanted to say yes, right? But the words that came out of my mouth were no. And I thought I was a terrible person for that. And I regretted it for years. But I come to find out as an alcoholic, like I'm in my craving at that point and literally nothing will stop me from drinking until I run out, pass out, get arrested. Not even like the person who cared about me most in the world asking me to come home and see them because they're dying. And that's like kind of an extreme example of that. I've had a lot of other examples of that, but like that's how that craving works in my life, right? And then another part is that mental obsession that the big book talks about, right? And that is when like I'm removed from my alcohol and I might be trying to stop, I might not be. But if I can't stay stopped for an extended period of time, like I might be doing it for whatever reason, but left to my own devices, I'm going to drink again, right? That's what the big book tells me. I'm going to drink again. So there was one time where I was in like a treatment facility up in New York for, I don't know, like 8 or 9 months, right? In that program, I didn't do any 12-step program, any AA stuff like I mentioned before. And I got out, and I also was facing like a lot of consequences at the time, legal consequences. So I knew like I don't know if I 100% wanted to stay sober, but I knew I shouldn't drink, right? And I knew like what was on the other side of it for me, and I intended not to drink when I got out of this program. And and I went on a vacation with my family shortly after, being like 8 months, we're gonna call it dry. And that vacation was on a cruise, right? And I told myself and my family before I left, like, I'm not gonna drink, right? And it was like a 10-day cruise. And like day one goes by, everything's fine. Two, three, four, everything's fine. And I remember there's like they have like nights where you like get dressed up really nice, and my family likes to do that, so they made me do that. So like I spent time, getting ready, got dressed up all nice, and I was walking to have a cigarette before dinner, and I thought like maybe I can have a drink today, like literally out of nowhere. And there's like a story in the big book about Jim, I believe, the car salesman who's just like at the diner, and all of a sudden he's like, a drink would be good. And like that was what happened to me, right? And I was like, all right, like let's try it, right? And it looked like I changed my mind, right? Because weeks, days leading up to that, like I'm not gonna drink. And in a split second, it's like, oh, cool. This seems like a good idea, right? And I was like, I'll just have one. And the funny thing about that time was, I did have one. Then the next day I had two, and then the next day I had like 12, and then I didn't have another sober day for about 6 months. And just to backtrack in that story, like the mental obsession works for me like it works for Jim. Like I'm just minding my own business, like trying to be a good person, like trying to not be a shitty family member, trying not to destroy my life. And my brain is wired to just say, you can drink again, or it'll be different this time, or whatever lie it has to tell me to make it look like a good idea to do it again. And I will every single time. And my experience confirms that, right? And then once I put that first one in, like I talked about before, the craving was set off. I wasn't sober again for another 6 months. So my life looked a lot like that for a bunch of years. Right before I got sober, um, I had been in a treatment center, and I decided like this is it, right? Like this is it. And I didn't fully understand this disease yet, but I knew I'm going to use all my willpower to do whatever I need to do to stop, right? To quit entirely. And I was in that facility for a little over a month. I got out. I'm staying sober. I'm gonna be a productive member of society. And I was back in that facility in 10 days, with no clue how I got there. And like in the past, like I had mentioned, like the other times I like wanted to stay sober, but there still was a part of me that didn't. Or like maybe down the road I could drink again, and I played out all those scenarios over the years. But this time, like I had like the lie detector test hooked up to me, like I'm staying sober. I mean it 100%. Like I'm telling the truth, and that's because I was right. And in that experience of drinking again, like really showed me how powerless I was, right? And really showed me um like what I was describing with that mental obsession. Like there is nothing I can do, and there's nothing on this planet that can keep me sober, right? Um, so like I kind of had that step one experience before I came in this time. And I was in a place that my first sponsor like jokingly calls like step 1.5, which is like you realize like you're screwed and you have this problem, but you don't yet realize there's a solution. And that's a really, really dark place to be in, because you're like, oh shit, what do I do now? Like I've tried every single thing I could think of, and I don't know what to do, right? So like when I washed up in a detox again, like I shared this with my therapist, and she said like what I thought was like something out of left field. She's like, well, have you ever done AA? And I looked at her and I was like, no. And she's like, why not? And I was like, I always had a good excuse why not before, but this time I had nothing. So I'm like, you know what? I was like, let's do this. And a little later on, there was a woman um, in the treatment facility that I was in Florida. She was like an old school, had 30 years sober, used to work at Hazelden type of woman. She was a tough woman. And she told me, she's like, you've been wasting your life and you're 30 years old, like just give me a year down here, work your steps, and you can do whatever you want after that. Um, and it sounded like a good idea at the time, and she kind of scared me a little bit, so I agreed to it, and I got plugged into this deal, right? There was that joke that I had read at the beginning about like H&I, but for any of you guys who do that, like thank you, because all those treatment facilities I was in before, like I was the person who would first of all, if H&I was optional, you wouldn't see me there. If I had to go there, I'd be like in the back, like smoking cigarettes and making fun of the speakers, like just to be transparent, like that's who I used to be. But this time, like I heard them, right? And I heard people sharing stories that sounded very similar to mine up into a point where they're like, oh, then I got plugged in and I got a sponsor and I got a home group and I worked steps and my life got really great. And, I got my family back in my life and like, I have a job and, I drive a car with like a valid license that also has insurance and like stuff that I really didn't have experience with before. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Because my story is like, I come here, I go back out, and then luckily I'll come back here again or worse, right? So they had my attention. And those speakers brought in a lot of hope to me too. And so again, just thank you for anyone who does that. And I got plugged in and I'd love to say like I was like 100% sold on this from the beginning, but I fought stuff. I remember I was like living in a halfway house with like 10 other dudes, and 9 of those dudes had sponsors, and I was the one who didn't. And we were like on our way to a meeting one night. Um, and we got stuck in traffic in Miami. If you've been there, you know. For like 45 minutes, and they're all telling me like, if you don't get a sponsor, you're gonna die. And finally, I was like, when we get back in this car, I will have a sponsor. And it wasn't because I thought it was the right thing to do. It's honestly because I was sick of hearing them, right? And I went to that meeting, and some guy shared, and I got plugged in with him, and he was my sponsor for 5 years, and he actually married me and my wife like a year ago, which is pretty cool. And I got with him and he kind of explained to me what this deal is, right? And he explained to me what the big book is, and he explained to me like what the steps are and why it's important to work them, and told me about the disease of alcoholism. And once I got to like that third step decision, I said a prayer with him, and he told me, and this is something like that I still remember to this day. He's like, "This is where I put your hand in God's hands." And I had no clue what the hell he was talking about at the time, but I do understand it now. And he's like, if you do this work, your life will change. So I'm like, well, my life kind of sucks now. So let's do it, right? And then at that point, I was kind of more like gung ho, and I worked my steps. And he's like, write this list, and go take this commitment, and greet at this meeting, and come with me here, and do this, do that. And I just did whatever. And I worked the steps with him, and I remember like, I don't know, around like 9 months sober, I was getting ready to like meet up with him to go over like the 12th step, I think it was. And I just remember like sitting outside my apartment at the time, like reading out of the big book, reading out of the 12 and 12, and just realizing that like the stuff in here started coming true in my life. And that was a really, really cool experience, right? Like the promises, the 9th step promises that were read at the beginning of this meeting, or the 10th step promises, and some of the stuff you hear in AA that, like, for me, who was very skeptical, was like, yeah, but I don't really believe it. Like when I would hear other people share about it, right? But I had enough faith that like I'll try it, right? And that faith kind of turned into my own experience, and that's a very, very powerful thing, right? So if you're new and you don't have that experience yet, you'll have to have faith that it is possible. But if you do the work, it will happen. Like a promise is a promise. It's not a maybe. And that was my experience, right? And then when I got to that point, I was like any good alcoholic, I want to do more of this. Like it makes me feel good, right? So, from there, I was just like on fire for AA for a bunch of years, which was really, really cool. Recently, I moved out of Miami, where I spent the first 7 years of my sobriety, about 2 hours north in Port St. Lucie. And if you've never moved in recovery, my experience is like I'm a newcomer again, right? It also doesn't help that, well, it doesn't help for my free time that right after we moved, we had a baby 2 weeks later. So I say all that to say the last year and a half was like me getting replugged back in up here. And how I got connected with this meeting is I got involved in FCYPAA, right? And a quick plug before I wrap up. The Treasure Coast of Florida is hosting this September. So if you want to go. It's going to be really fun. So I got plugged in with those people, and it's been a great way to meet people in my new area and get involved in service in my new area and get to do things like this. Um, so I feel like my brain is very scattered today because I kind of had a crazy day. So I'm hoping I said something that helps somebody. And once again, like, thank you all for having me and inviting me out. This is really, really cool. So thanks, guys.